Number 10. Revolutionary War Cannons. While dredging the Savannah River last year, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers discovered an anchor, old ship timber, and 3 5-foot-long cannons that may date back to the Revolutionary War era. Researchers were quick to weigh in on the finds and suggested that the cannons may have been used as a ballast or tossed overboard. Based on their appearance and measurements, archaeologists and the British Royal Navy initially speculated that they may have come from a warship called the HMS Rose. The vessel was intentionally scuttled 250 years ago to block French ships from passing through the canal and aiding the colonists fighting against Britain. But records later disproved this theory after revealing that the HMS Rose was sunk further upriver. The Army Corps of Engineers recently found another dozen cannons in the Savannah River, bringing the total number to 15. Like the ones discovered last year, they're thought to be from the Revolutionary era, but their exact origins are still in question. The first 3 cannons were all found in a deep part of the river near an early 19th century fortification called Old Fort Jackson. The discovery prompted a search in other parts of the river for more cannons, which led to the latest find. Researchers have tentatively dated the recently discovered cannons to the mid-1700s, but they'll know more after cleaning and further inspecting them. Number 9. Goliath Tigerfish. The Goliath tigerfish is the largest tigerfish species. It's often thought of as a larger and much deadlier version of a piranha. The biggest recorded specimen was nearly 5 feet long and weighed 154 pounds. The species is native to several parts of Africa in and around the Democratic Republic of Congo, including the Congo River Basin, the Lualaba River, Lake Upemba, and elsewhere. People from these regions have claimed that the Goliath tigerfish is the only fish that isn't afraid of crocodiles, and that it sometimes even eats small reptiles. It hunts prey using its strong force, lightning speed, and 32 jagged razor-sharp teeth, each measuring up to an inch long, to chomp down on its next meal with surgical precision and little to no warning. Goliath tigerfish are even known to attack humans from time to time, and even when a person wins the battle against one, victory isn't easily achieved. In 2010, British angler and River Monsters host Jeremy Wade caught a Goliath tigerfish, earning him a distinction that only a handful of fishermen are known to have. He captured the creature in the Congo Basin after an 8-day hunt. Knowing how dangerous the fish can be and that he could easily lose a finger or two if he wasn't careful, Wade used extra caution reeling in his catch. Number 8. Il2 Sturmovik. The Ilyushin Il2 Sturmovik is a World War II-era Soviet-manufactured ground attack aircraft. Over 36,000 were made between 1941 and 1946, making it the most heavily produced military aircraft in all aviation history. Despite the mass production, only a dozen or so complete examples of the plane exist today. In 2017, Russian researchers recovered a rare single-seater Sturmovik from Lake Kryvyi in Murmansk Oblast. Not surprisingly, the plane was extremely rusted and decaying, but for an aircraft that crash-landed and then sat in 60 feet of water for 75 years, it was in remarkably good condition. The team was able to make out its serial number and Red Army insignia, and they found propaganda papers and maps inside the cockpit. It appears as though the Sturmovik was struck by German troops, leaving the pilot with no other choice but to perform a forced landing. He managed to travel back into friendly territory before ditching in the lake. Thankfully, he escaped alive. Shortly after the plane's discovery, news articles reported that it's being restored to airworthy status. It'll be the first single-seat Sturmovik that's capable of taking to the skies in modern times. Number 7. Thousands of bicycles. At any given time, there are anywhere from 881,000 to 2 million bicycles in Amsterdam, which is world famous for its bike-friendly culture. And they don't just fill the streets. Every year, thousands of bikes end up in the city's canals. Many of them fall into the water or are blown in by the wind after being parked too close to it, but the vast majority of them are thrown in there on purpose. Petty criminals throw them in there for amusement and to dispose of evidence after committing a theft, and owners often seem to toss their bikes into the water when they break and aren't worth repairing. The accumulation requires the periodic removal of the discarded bicycles from the water. Otherwise, they pile so high that they start scraping the bottoms of boats. A company called WaterNet has been tasked with getting the job done since the 1960s. Workers travel through the canal on barges, fishing for and collecting sunken bikes, and also removes them using a hydraulic claw connected to a crane. It takes a lot of work to keep Amsterdam's 165 canals, which add up to 60 miles of waterways. WaterNet removes between 12,000 to 15,000 bikes each year. Number 6. An out-of-place alligator. The Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism encountered an unusual and troubling discovery last year when an American alligator carcass appeared in the Ninesca River, far outside the species' native range. Investigators concluded that the dead alligator must have been someone's pet and that they released it into the river after it got too big for them to take care of. A local herpetologist determined that the creature was around 3 years old when it died. In a Facebook post featuring an image of the dead reptile, state game wardens reminded social media users that while baby alligators may seem like cool pets, they inevitably grow up to become large, dangerous predators. The post went on to point out that people often fail to consider the consequences of trying to raise a wild animal as a pet, and that captively raised alligators can never be released into the wild. When an animal is raised by a human, they learn to associate people with food, and this is generally not a behavior that they can unlearn. Once the lesson is taught, the damage is done, and the animal must remain in the care of humans for the rest of its life. Have you found a wild animal somewhere it didn't belong? Tell us about it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 5. Boeing 737 fuselages. In 2014, cleanup crews in western Montana were faced with a bizarre situation they never expected. A train derailed and sent 3 Boeing 737 fuselages tumbling down an embankment and into the Clark Fork River. The accident happened when 19 cars became separated from the tracks while traveling westbound. All of the 6 fuselages it was carrying fell off, but 3 stayed on dry land. They were en route to Washington, where they would be used in the production of new airplanes. The company responsible, Montana Rail Link, had never faced a predicament of this kind, leaving officials unsure of exactly how to respond, according to spokeswoman Linda Frost, who spoke with the Associated Press following the incident. Authorities announced that they were investigating to find out what caused the derailment. Thankfully, nobody was injured and none of the train's other cargo spilled. Number 4. A crocodile in Paris. Back in 1984, sanitation workers discovered a live 31-inch Nile crocodile in the River Seine in Paris. This was extremely concerning. Not only was the creature outside its native range of Africa and Madagascar, the species is known for being exceptionally aggressive and dangerous, even in comparison to other types of crocodiles. The team contacted zoo veterinarians who determined that the young female reptile was nowhere near full grown. They named her Eleanor and moved her to the Aquarium de Vannes in Brittany, which was a much healthier and safer environment for both her and the public. Nobody knows how Eleanor ended up in the river, although it's likely that someone kept her as an exotic pet and then released her when she started getting too big for them to continue caring for her. It was estimated that she spent anywhere from 1 to 2 months in the Seine and in France's sewer systems before she was discovered. Eleanor spent her remaining years at the aquarium, where she lived in an enclosure that was designed to resemble the Paris sewers. As an adult, she grew to be over 8 feet long and weighed around 550 pounds. She was in her 40s when she passed away last year. Number 3. Giant freshwater stingray. The giant freshwater stingray may very well qualify as the world's largest freshwater fish. This ancient species, which appears to have changed very little over its several million-year existence, is largely a mystery to scientists. Freshwater stingrays are one of the only rays who prefer freshwater environments over saltwater habitats, although it's unknown whether they ever enter the ocean. They are found throughout Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Indonesia, where they live and hunt among river bottoms. Researchers believe that freshwater stingrays reach as much as 16.5 feet long and weigh up to 4,300 pounds. That's bigger than a small car. Freshwater stingrays are curious and non-aggressive by nature, and they do not typically attack humans. but they can be very dangerous to people who come into contact with them. At the base of the animal's tail is a sharp barb that can easily damage human skin and bone. And the creatures are also equipped with a poisonous stinger measuring up to 15 inches long. Fishers do not target freshwater stingrays because they are not a favored food source, but they sometimes unintentionally capture the animals in their nets or with their hooks. Stories of the creatures dragging boats around and sometimes even pulling them underwater demonstrate the very real dangers of accidentally catching a freshwater stingray. As terrifying as these creatures are, they are less of a threat to us than the other way around, and are classified as endangered. While their numbers are unknown, freshwater stingrays are thought to no longer inhabit the expanse of their former range, and are threatened by human activities such as pollution and the aquarium trade. Number 2. Brothel Token. While walking along the Thames River in West London during low tide one day in 2012, amateur archaeologist Regis Curson spotted a bronze token in the mud. He told Mail Online that based on the object's size and thickness, he initially thought it was a Roman coin. After rubbing the sediment off it, he saw a number on one side and what looked like a woman or a female goddess on the other. Experts took a look at the artifact and realized that the coin features an image of two people engaging in a sexual act. This suggests that it's a token called a spintria, which would have been used in a Roman brothel. Carson's discovery was the first coin of its type ever found in Britain. It dates back to the 1st century, making it around 2,000 years old, but it's in remarkable condition for its age, thanks to the preserving effect of the mud it sat in for so long. Describing the design on the coin as saucy, Museum of London curator Carolyn MacDonald said that while the team admittedly giggled, they also realized that there was probably a very sad story behind the artifact because most prostitutes were slaves. Some researchers think that these tokens were a tool for brothel owners to ensure that they collected on the services rendered and that the prostitutes didn't receive any actual money. MacDonald said that it's also possible that the customer exchanged the token for the act depicted on it. Not all scholars agree with the statement, however. When the coin's image seems to point in an obvious direction regarding its use, Cambridge professor Mary Beard suggested that things are not always as they seem. It could have had some other purpose, including as a board game token. Number 1. Manatee with a message. Someone took their desire to express their political beliefs to a new low early last year when they etched the word Trump onto an innocent manatee's body in capital letters. The creature was spotted swimming in Florida's Homosassa River during a manatee boat tour. A quick-thinking onlooker captured footage and passed it on to authorities, who estimated that the manatee was between 3 and 4 years old. Those looking to justify the disturbing act were quick to point out that the letters were not carved directly into the animal's skin. And it's true, the culprit etched their message into algae that was growing on the creature's back. The person likely has experience working with manatees and left the animal uninjured. But that doesn't exactly make it right for someone to scrawl their political sentiments onto a wild creature's body. Those involved in the case took the act as a sign that the individual might be capable of taking their behavior even further and inflicting actual harm on wildlife. Plus, manatees are protected under several laws, including the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which makes it a crime to harass them and doesn't necessarily require an injury for an act to be considered a law violation. Shortly after the incident, which happened just days after rioters violently stormed the US Capitol, the Center for Biological Diversity offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the identity of the person who violated the gentle giant. The reward was raised to $8,000 a few months later, but it appears as though the case remains unsolved.
9. HMS Stubbor. The HMS Stubbor was a British Royal Navy submarine built in 1942. It spent World War II patrolling for enemy ships in home waters, off the Scandinavian coast, and in the Pacific Far East. The vessel truly lived up to its name, successfully completing 10 war patrols and sinking numerous vessels despite repeatedly sustaining damage along the way. The submarine survived the war, but it came out of the conflict in pretty rough shape. It was deliberately scuttled off the northern Maltese coast in 1946 as a sonar training target. The wreck sits mostly upright on the sandy sea bottom, 164 feet, 50 meters beneath the waves. It's one of the few remaining examples of the 67 S-class submarines that were built. Most were sold for scrap or lost in the war. Divers rediscovered the vessel in 1994 after it sat forgotten for decades. In fact, locals were reportedly unaware that such a fascinating wreck even existed, and so close to them. Its 3 hatches are open, but it's unsafe to try entering the vehicle, and its torpedo tubes and propellers are still visible. 8. Hitler's failed stadium. Before World War II broke out, Adolf Hitler acted on his grand vision of building one of the world's largest sports stadiums in the city of Nuremberg. Known as the Deutschstadion, or the German Stadium, it would be over 2,600 feet, 793 meters long, and 1,476, 450 meters wide. Its 300-foot-high, 91-meter grandstands would have enough room for 400,000 spectators. Hitler and his chief architect Albert Speer ordered the construction of a test model of a section of the U-shaped stadium before the real deal could be built. A 400-member workforce spent the next year and a half creating a true-to-scale section of seating in a forested area about an hour outside of Nuremberg. It was big enough to hold 40,000 people. The stadium's designers were pretty pleased with the test model, and construction was ordered to begin in 1938. But his priorities shifted when the war broke out, and the project was abandoned the following year. Locals dismantled most of the test model and used the wood to build new homes after theirs were destroyed in the war. There are still some visible remnants of the structure, including walls and concrete pillars. The site has been reclaimed by nature and is once again filled with plants and trees. 7. Toxic pollution. Less than a mile off the Scottish coast, there's a small uninhabited landmass called Greenard Island. In 1942, it became home to a top-secret biological weapons testing facility. The UK government experimented with a deadly anthrax strain called Volum 14578 by packing it into bombs and deploying the weapons on innocent flocks of sheep. The results were nothing short of deadly and proved that Volum 14578 had the capacity to contaminate entire German cities for decades. Consequently, the tests left Greenard Island heavily polluted. During the 1980s, a clandestine organization of environmental activists calling themselves Operation Dark Harvest began writing to newspapers about the toxic conditions. They claimed that a pair of scientists had visited the site firsthand and collected soil samples, which the group threatened to leave in places that would make the problem impossible for the British government to ignore. The activists eventually made good on their promises by leaving a soil sample outside the Porton Down military research facility. It tested positive for anthrax. Decontamination efforts finally began in 1986. The most heavily contaminated soil was removed from Greenard, and the entire island was sprayed with a mixture of formaldehyde and seawater. They left behind a flock of sheep, which remained mostly healthy. Greenard Island was officially declared anthrax-free in 1990, and none of the sheep have tested positive for the poison since 2007. The details of what went on at Greenard became publicly available in 1997, when documents about the biological warfare project were declassified. Some people believe that the site could still be toxic, but the good news is that it's unlikely anyone will go there anytime soon, because the property is privately owned. 6. Oradour-sur-Glane. On June 10, 1944, Nazis entered the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane and demanded to see residents' identity papers. They locked women and children in a church and forced the men into another building. Then they embarked on a campaign of terror, looting the village and massacring 643 people in just a few hours' time. There were only 6 survivors, in addition to 20 people who'd fled immediately upon the Nazis' arrival. One eyewitness said that the Germans shot the village's men in the legs so they couldn't run, then set the building they were in on fire, leaving them to slowly suffer to death. After that, the Nazis blew up the church holding the women and children. Those who tried to escape through the building's windows were shot to death. SS Commander Adolf Diekmann claimed the massacre was in retaliation for the kidnapping and murder of a fellow officer. The survivors were allowed to return to Oradour-sur-Glane a week later to bury their dead. They built a new, village nearby. After the war, French General Charles de Gaulle ordered for the destroyed village to be preserved as a memorial to the lives lost and as a reminder of the Nazis' cruelty. Today, it's a ghost town that sits in ruins. There's a museum at the village's entrance, along with a memorial bearing all the victims' names. To some, it may seem morbid to preserve the remnants of such a tragic and traumatic event. But by inviting visitors to reflect on what happened at Oradour-sur-Glane, the site keeps the senseless atrocities of hatred and war at the forefront of people's minds, which is important to prevent history from repeating itself. 5. USS Bear. The USS Bear was a US Coast Guard cutter and a forerunner to modern icebreakers that enjoyed a long career in the frigid Arctic, Antarctic, and North Atlantic regions. Built in 1874 as a sealing vessel, the ship entered military service a decade later when the US Navy bought it and used it for an Arctic rescue mission. After that, the Bear served under the Coast Guard for 40 years, patrolling Alaska's 20,000-mile, 32,187-kilometer coastline for seal poachers, illicit traders, and people in need of help. It also functioned as a floating courthouse, delivered food to civilians in need, and ferried reindeer between Siberia and Alaska. From 1939 to 1941, the Bear served in the US Antarctic Service Expedition. During World War II, it patrolled the waters off Greenland, making it the oldest Navy ship to be deployed outside the continental US, and one of the last ships with sails to be used in war. The Bear was finally retired from military service in 1948. In 1963, it was sold to a Philadelphia businessman named Alfred Johnston, who planned to convert it into a floating restaurant. But the vessel foundered and sank 260 miles, 418 kilometers east of Boston, while en route from California to its new home. The Coast Guard rediscovered the wreck in 2019, but only recently confirmed its identity as the USS Bear. It's unclear whether there are plans to further explore it. What do you think should happen to the USS Bear? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. 4. Valley of Death Massacre. By early 1945, the Nazis realized that they were probably going to lose the war against the Allies, and they scrambled to hide evidence of their war crimes. In January of that year, they marched 50 prisoners into the forest in northern Poland and shot them to death one by one at close range. Then they burned the bodies and buried them in a mass grave. It happened near the site of another massacre that had been carried out in 1939. But until recently, both events were only known based on eyewitness accounts. Archaeologists finally uncovered physical evidence of the gruesome killings last year while excavating in the area. In addition to human remains, the team dug up an array of artifacts, including jewelry, cigarette lighters, bullet casings, and more. Many massacres like this happened outside concentration camps during the war. But these sites are rarely studied, out of respect for Jewish burial customs and beliefs, which prohibit the disturbance of human remains. The recently discovered evidence is in a region known as the Valley of Death, where the Nazis murdered hundreds of priests, intellectuals, disabled individuals, and members of the Jewish faith. Some of the victims' remains have been identified through personal belongings that were found at the site. Experts are performing DNA tests in hopes of naming more victims and finding any surviving family members. But it's unlikely that they'll identify every individual due to the sheer number of killings that happened there. Once the testing's complete, the remains will be respectfully reburied. 3. Love letters. While renovating the Esplanade Hotel in Scarborough, England last year, workers found a trove of World War II-era artifacts hidden beneath the floorboards of a utility room. The collection includes an old Vaseline tin, cigarette packs, toothpaste tubes, candy wrappers, and a handful of letters exchanged between a man and a woman who were deeply in love but separated by distance. The pair wrote about the trivial details of their daily lives, like the weather, going on outings with their friends, and having sore gums from an abscessed tooth. They also expressed deeper sentiments, like feeling lonely and depressed, and missing each other as the days apart dragged by slowly and painfully. In one letter, the woman wrote, "Wherever you go, my darling, don't ever forget that I love you more than anything else on earth." The letters aren't signed, but the Scarborough Historical and Archaeological Society, SHAC, hopes to identify the writers. They've dated the correspondence to sometime between 1941 and 1944, and believe that one of the parties was a British military soldier who was stationed at the hotel during the war. One of the letters contains a return address that was traced to a couple named Jesse and James McConnell. Their son, John, served in the Royal Air Force before tragically dying in a plane crash in 1943. He was just 19 years old. The letters may have been exchanged between John and his girlfriend. It seems like a strong lead, but the SHAC has yet to update the public on whether it panned out. At last update, the organization said that it hopes to find more World War II relics inside the hotel, but that the on and off nature of the country's COVID-19 restrictions had slowed down their search. Some discoveries, like these letters, may not be worth a lot of money, but they're treasures in their own right for their historic value, offering a rare glimpse into the traumas of war and the emotional struggles that came along with being separated from loved ones. 2. Possible stolen treasure in Poland. There are countless stories about treasure hoards of immeasurable worth being stashed in places around the world at various points throughout history. Many of these rumors are thought to be purely mythical, but sometimes even the experts lend credibility to legends about hidden troves. More than 75 years ago, an SS officer going by the alias Michaelis wrote about Commander Heinrich Himmler's orders to hide loads of stolen European treasures, including gold, jewels, priceless artwork, and more. He listed 11 sites where the items were allegedly concealed, including an abandoned 200-foot deep, 60 meters well behind the 16th century Hochberg Palace in Poland. The well reportedly contains billions of dollars worth of gold from the former German central bank. The writings also claim that the Nazis murdered any witness to the process of hiding the goods and dumped their bodies in the well along with the treasure. Then they sealed the well's entrance by detonating explosives. After the war ended, the journal was secretly kept at a Masonic lodge in Quedlinburg, Germany, which counted former high-ranking Nazi officers among its top members. Michaelis, who controlled the Nazi transport throughout southern Poland, was one of them. In 2019, the organization handed the diary over to an organization called the Silesian Bridge as an apology for World War II. At last update, the Polish Ministry of Culture and National Heritage had to confirm the journal's authenticity, but it hasn't been dismissed as a fake. The palace that the treasure is allegedly hidden behind still stands, serving as a good sign that the hoard might still be there if the claims are true. 1. Hario Wireless Telegraph Station. In the years immediately following World War I, the Imperial Japanese Navy built a powerful radio transmitter facility in the city of Sasebo. Known as the Hario Wireless Telegraph Station, it consists of several 446-foot tall, 136 meters reinforced concrete towers that resemble smokestacks. There are also several smaller buildings at the site, including a transmission room which sits in the center of the towers. Legend has it that the official order to attack Pearl Harbor came through Hario. The order originated on the battleship Nagato, then made its way through Tokyo, and then allegedly reached the wireless station. Nobody knows if this is true because Japanese records were burned at the end of the war. But all the signs point toward it being the case, since Hario was built to transmit long-distance messages, and its towers were directly connected to the nearby Sasebo Air Defense Command Center. The site operated until 1997 before it was abandoned. The towers were gutted of their equipment, and the facility was condemned and has since become overgrown, although there is an on-site staff that watches over and maintains it. Although the telegraph station isn't open to the public, the former Sasebo Regional Repatriation Center is just a few miles away and has been turned into a museum dedicated to lesser-known aspects of life after World War II. Here, visitors can learn what it was like for Japanese military members and members of the country's former colonies who returned when the conflict ended.
Number 10. Machines around the world. Almost every corner of the globe is littered with at least a handful of old war machines, including even the most remote places imaginable. Photographer and history enthusiast Dmitry Osadchi has traveled the world capturing snapshots of rotting military equipment before it inevitably loses its battle against time and Mother Nature. He's been to more than 50 countries, including the desert of the United Arab Emirates, where he snapped photos of decaying planes, as well as the Russian Arctic, where he photographed boats trapped in the ice. Simply put, Osadchi has experienced nearly every type of environment imaginable in order to capture photos of these machines that look like they're still waiting around, ready to enter battle on a moment's notice, despite having sat for decades. Many of the boats, planes, and tanks are kept closely guarded at places that are inaccessible to the public, even though they'll probably never be used again. The 38-year-old photographer has even caught pictures of the iconic Lund-class Ukranoplan, known as the Caspian Sea Monster. The 301-foot-long Soviet Cold War-era machine has been sitting on the beach in Derbent, Russia since 2020. Osadchi also snapped haunting images of an entire tank graveyard that's being reclaimed by nature, along with some Soviet locomotives in Leningrad Oblast and this photo of an abandoned torpedo launcher in Kronstadt. Number 9. SS Bloody Marsh. On July 2, 1943, a German U-boat fired a torpedo and struck an oil tanker called the SS Bloody Marsh off the South Carolina coast. The ship was on its maiden voyage from New York to Houston with nearly 5 million gallons of oil on board. 3 crew members died. Everyone else thankfully managed to escape on life rafts before a second torpedo hit the ship and broke it in two, causing it to sink rapidly. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration officials were concerned that the Bloody Marsh could be leaking oil and added it to the organization's potentially polluting wrecks list. A team of scientists tried but failed to find the wreck in 2019 when they investigated a potential target and instead discovered a submerged rock outcrop. They searched again last year and had better luck when they located a sunken ship near some oil slicks that were identified in satellite images. The team found the wreck using remotely operated vehicles or ROVs, which captured footage of the rusting, debris-covered vessel. Based on the ship's damage and build, which was customary of a 1940s-era design, all signs point toward it being the Bloody Marsh. The team searched the area pretty thoroughly, but parts of the ship remain missing, including the bow and some of the cargo tanks. They didn't see any oil leaking from the heavily corroded vessel, but it's likely that there have been leaks and that there will be more. NOAA scientist Mike Brennan pointed out that the ship's hull appeared relatively intact and that it's not in danger of imminently failing catastrophically. Brennan also said that he is confident that the wreck is the Bloody Marsh and called for future exploration to hopefully find the missing bow. Number 8. Lager 3. The Nazi Party was still rising to power when its armed forces, the Wehrmacht, began building a series of training facilities and housing quarters throughout Germany's forests. One of them, known as Farstzina Lager 3 or Adolf Hitler Lager, was built about an hour south of Berlin in 1934. It contained soldiers, barracks, administrative buildings, a prison, and more. In 1940, the base became a site for tank drivers to train. After World War II, the Soviet military took control of the property and initially used it as a center for Eastern European refugees and former concentration camp prisoners. Displaced individuals were kept there against their will while awaiting deportation. Starting in 1947, the base was converted into a training site for the future leaders of East Germany. After that, it became a university specializing in political science and law. The Red Army continued to use and expand the site, which grew to include farm buildings, a cinema, and a zoo. They cleared out during the late 80s as the Soviet Union faced mounting financial problems. Germany reunited and became the new owner of the base, but had no use for it. Urbex's photographer Andrei Jus captured photos which show old, crumbling Soviet signs and artwork, along with chipping paint, broken furniture, and debris-ridden floors. The images also feature a dilapidated gymnasium, old apartment blocks, decades-old calendars, and office desks, and more. Since then, most of these buildings have been demolished. Number 7. Unmarked Grave and Sunken Airplane. In late September 1944, the Allies launched Operation Market Garden. The mission aimed to free the Netherlands from Nazi control and encroach upon northern Germany. Thousands of paratroopers landed on key bridges throughout the country, liberating several regions in the process. But the mission came at a cost. Somewhere between 15,000 and 17,000 lost their lives. While searching a field recently in the municipality of Brach, a Dutch treasure hunter's metal detector led him to ammunition and a dog tag belonging to a German soldier who was buried in an unmarked grave. His remains were at the bottom of a foxhole, but there were no other bodies or equipment nearby. The Royal Netherlands Army Salvage and Identification Service is investigating the case. It is hoping to identify the soldier through his dog tag. The discovery came last year, just days after news broke of an amateur diver named Mark Sarrazin discovering a World War II-era plane at the bottom of Lake Simon in Quebec. Police told the local press that Sarrazin had captured photos of an object that, in their words, could resemble an airplane. The Canadian Army is also involved in the investigation. Sarrazin claimed that he hit the plane's propellers and saw bodies and kerosene barrels aboard the sunken vehicle. He's unable to share images and footage of his findings while authorities work to confirm the discovery. Officials have not yet announced whether Sarrazin's suspicions about the object being a World War II-era plane are correct. Number 6. Suomenlinna Fortress. Construction on a Finnish maritime fortress known as Suomenlinna began in 1748 on the Siciliadot Islands in Helsinki's harbor. At the time, the base, then called Viipuri, was under Swedish control, and it remained that way until 1808 when the Russians took over. Finland gained autonomy the following year, but the base stayed in Russian hands until 1917, when Finland became fully independent. The Finnish government renamed the site Suomenlinna, which means Castle of Finland. Over the years, the fortress grew to include around 200 buildings and stretches across 6 islands. During World War II, the base housed a submarine fleet and anti-aircraft and artillery units. Only a few military units remained at Suomenlinna after the war ended. In 1972, the military cleared out of all but one section of the property, and the rest of it fell into civilian hands. The Naval Academy is the only remaining military presence there. Many of the buildings were repurposed for residential use. Suomenlinna became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1991. Since then, it's become an official district of Helsinki and one of Finland's most popular tourist attractions, attracting roughly 1 million visitors per year. Around 800 people call Suomenlinna home and another 400 work there. There are still some visible remnants of its military past, including a cannon that sits outside. Would you like to visit the Suomenlinna Fortress? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 5. SS St. Christopher. Originally named the HMS Justice, the SS St. Christopher was a 165-foot-long rescue tug that was built for the US Navy in 1943 during World War II. But the Americans never used the wooden vessel. Instead, the British Royal Army borrowed it under the Lend-Lease Act, which provided US allies with food, oil, and military equipment. The St. Christopher was used during the Allied invasion of Normandy, better known as D-Day, on June 6, 1944. It was returned to the US Navy after the war ended and was then sold to a private buyer. During the 1950s, the boat ran aground and encountered engine and rudder problems. It was grounded at Beagle Channel in Ushuaia, at the southern tip of Argentina. Nicknamed the End of the World, it's famous as the world's southernmost city. Today, the St. Christopher lies partially submerged in exactly the same spot where it was abandoned almost 65 years ago. It has since become a tourist attraction and is lit up at night, but nobody is allowed to board the heavily damaged vessel, which looks as if it might finish sinking into the ocean at any moment. Number 4. COV Aerodome. Built during the early 1950s, the COV Aerodome was an air base in southern Albania. As the Albanian Civil War gripped the country during the 1990s, the area surrounding the base became a major stronghold of the rebel movement that sought to topple the government. Protesters captured the base and inflicted heavy damage, and it wasn't repaired until 2 years later. During the early 2000s, the aerodome underwent extensive renovations to bring it up to NATO standards. A new control tower and lighting were installed, and the outside was repaved. As part of its modernization effort, the Albanian government announced in 2004 that it would scrap 80 obsolete aircraft, which it stored at the base as part of the process. And there's more to the COV Aerodome's colorful past. It was featured in a controversial episode of Top Gear. The show's host came under fire for making derogatory comments, accusing Albanians of being luxury car thieves and organized criminals. 2 years ago, NATO announced plans to commit over $57 million to upgrade the base. The organization explained in a statement that it was sponsoring the project in an effort to raise Albania's profile as a reliable member state and to facilitate robust air-related operations. The country's president Ilir Meta said that Albania was ready to take on more responsibilities to benefit the region's peace and security. Since then, the once deserted base's future has gone from looking dismal to promising. Earlier this year, the press revealed that the American military is participating in the project to improve the COV Aerodome. U.S. soldiers traveled to the country for an annual program called Defender 21, which prepares troops for operational readiness and working with other militaries from over 24 countries. In addition to bringing jobs to the local community, the event helped bolster the base's modern new image as a bustling military hub. Number 3. Fiat L640 tank. Built by Fiat during World War II, the L640 was a light tank used by the Italian and Sicilian militaries starting in 1940. It was deployed in battles against the Soviet Union, as well as the Balkans and North African campaigns. Only 3 of these armored vehicles are known to still exist today. One sits outside Gjirokastra Castle in Albania and was likely used in the Balkans campaign. The fortress dates at least as far back as the 12th century and possibly even earlier. Today, it's a military museum commemorating the communist struggle against imperial Western powers. In addition to the L640 tank, the site houses a captured U.S. Air Force plane, as well as captured artillery from the resistance against German occupation. Despite its rich history, Gjirokastra Castle is a lesser-known tourist attraction. The decommissioned tank stands in solitude outside the fort as a lonesome reminder of one of the darkest chapters in world history. The other 2 surviving L640s are in Legnano, Italy, and the Kubinka Tank Museum outside Moscow. Number 2. Nazi Hoard. A man named Sebastian Yurtseven was renovating his aunt's home in Hagen, Germany last year when he came across a collection of Nazi artifacts hidden in the wall. The trove included documents about a branch of the Nazi Party known as the National Socialist People's Welfare Organization, which evacuated children to rural areas and distributed food and gas masks to civilians. The agency also ran a clothing donation program and gave vaccines, exams, and other medical care to those in need. By 1943, the NSV boasted an estimated 17 million members. At the time, Yurtseven's family didn't own the home, which served as the organization's headquarters. Historians believe that someone hid the collection of paperwork and other artifacts as U.S. troops advanced on Hagen in 1945. Some of the documents date as far back as 1929. They represent some of the few surviving sources on the NSV, which makes the discovery especially useful when it comes to learning about the agency's inner workings. The NSV was dissolved following Germany's defeat in the war under a policy implemented by the Allies called Law No. 2. When the Yurtsevens bought the house during the 1960s, they didn't know that it had any past Nazi affiliations. Employees from the Hagen City Archives took the items for further study, and they planned to eventually display them in a local museum. Number 1. Secretly stashed tank. Police in the northern German city of Kiel received an unusual call in 2015 when they got a tip about a resident having a large cache of Nazi weapons in his basement. The 84-year-old man's illicit hoard had reportedly been discovered using a previous search of his home for stolen Nazi artwork. Officers found dozens of rifles and machine guns, a torpedo, an anti-aircraft cannon, over 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and a 40-ton Panther tank inside the suspect's home. It took a group of 20 soldiers around 9 hours to remove the armored vehicle from the house. Germany's War Weapons Control Act regulates the manufacture, sale, and transport of weapons of war. Whether or not the elderly collector violated the law depended largely on how operational the weapons were. The man claimed that the tank was just scrap metal that he bought in England, and his lawyers argued that the items were non-functional, describing them as demilitarized historical museum objects. But the court felt differently and ruled that the suspect had broken the law. He received a suspended sentence of 10 months. In the meantime, the court has given him 2 years to find a museum that's willing to take the tank and the anti-aircraft cannon. He was also ordered to pay a €250,000 fine. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!